Well, welcome everybody to this webinar, and I'm delighted to have Eilon Caspi, PhD in gerontology, a internationally known and writer and researcher, and we're delighted to have him here today to talk about staff fear of retaliation in nursing homes. And to get us going, Eilon, tell us a little bit what got you interested in this subject, and I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. I started working in the aging field nearly 30 years ago as a nurse aide in a nursing home where my grandfather lived. And I worked as a social worker in those settings, and I did numerous research studies in those care settings. And one of the things that is becoming clear is that the voice of the foundation of care, those direct care staff members, vast majority of them are women, is often not being heard to the extent that it can inform improvements in care, safety, dignity, and reduction of different forms of mistreatment. So when I did a recent project on a resident fear of retaliation, I'm going to talk about it in a minute, I came across numerous investigation reports across the country on staff fear of retaliation. And that led me to conduct an examination of these investigation reports. And really, the bottom line is to convey the message that staff voice matters. And I hope this presentation will demonstrate that and the opportunities for nursing homes and assisted living in improving the care for the residents. So I called it Staff Fear of Retaliation in Nursing Homes, an Unexplored Phenomenon. And I want to just say, I recognize the Nursing Home Inspect of ProPublica website, which is the source of the data for this project. I want to thank Elder Voice Advocates for the inspiration for this project through its members and board members' experiences in those settings. The Long-Term Care Community Coalition for early support and funding of a very early and small part of this project. And I want to thank Teresa Piccolo for funding this project. Before I start, I want to recognize that from the very first day that the first nursing home in America opened, direct care staff members were heroes. We're hearing more of that word most recently during the pandemic, and we should. However, they were always heroes. The problem is that in all too many cases, they were far from being treated as such. And here you have a quote from a certified nursing assistant that I observed for nearly a year in an early study that I conducted, and she was very caring, compassionate, and professional. And she said, certified nursing assistants, or CNAs, are the foundation of the caregiving industry. I use the word foundation because just like putting up a building, first you have a strong foundation or else the building will not stand. The CNAs are the backbone of the organization because as caregivers, we are with the residents 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from the time they're awake to the time they go to sleep. We know each and every one of our residents intimately. We love working with the residents. It gives us joy that we can assist them in the evening of their lives. We truly care for the residents, and that honest care shows in the work we do. In closing, while we do not hold an MD or a PhD, CNAs are equally as important because we are the foundation and bridge between the residents, family, and management. So I want to just say that I believe that the vast majority of direct care staff members are caring and loving and compassionate and dedicated people and professionals. As I mentioned earlier, a few weeks ago, I completed a study that serves the basis for a report. You can see the title page here. They Make You Pay: How Fear of Retaliation Silences Residents in America's Nursing Home. I analyzed 100 investigation reports in 100 nursing homes in 30 states. And there's a comprehensive report that the Long-Term Care Community Coalition funded and created and released a few weeks ago. So, you have to mention this phenomena. Today, we're going to talk about the related phenomena. And Chris, you wrote me recently, we constantly hear about retaliation fears and actual harms to residents, families, and staff. You said that this is a rapidly escalating problem that results in inconceivable suffering, and it must be stopped. I have to mention a whole related phenomena whereby when family members express concerns about care or file complaints related to poor care and mistreatment, they and/or their loved ones may experience retaliation. As Jean Peters, former president of Elder Voice Advocates, wrote, "Our family immediately reported a video recording abuse of our mother to the administration and to the authorities. While an investigation was proceeding, staff didn't want the care they gave to be recorded. As a result, our mother's care was repeatedly neglected, leading to her death. Nearly a decade later, we are still haunted by the memory of this." Today, we're going to talk about the phenomena of staff fear of retaliation in the specific context of reporting right violations, poor care, and mistreatment of residents. As a nurse aide in a nursing home where there was poor staffing levels in my project said, "We want to be listened to and taken seriously about our concerns. We want to be worked with on solutions to make it a better place for staff to work in, so these residents have a better place to live in." And we are seeing media reports about this phenomena as well. In Minnesota recently, in a Hastings veterans home, comprehensive, a series of allegations of harassment and retaliation against employees at this veterans home. And on the right-hand side, early during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had direct care staff members who claimed to be retaliated against by their nursing homes for reporting COVID-related risks. And several years ago, a jury awarded over $5 million to a nurse in a nursing home. She was fired after she refused to follow the director of nursing orders to double dose anti-anxiety medication for residents described as agitated. She also refused to delete records of suspicious resident injuries. I want to highlight the importance of this phenomenon through research a little bit. A large study in hospitals was an anonymous survey among over 500 staff members, nurses, nurse aides, and physicians and others, found that higher levels of perceived fear of retaliation was related to lower overall patient safety. And a large-scale study among administrators in nursing homes, among 4,000 administrators and directors of nursing, classified a type of manager style, administrator style, described as consensus managers. That is, leaders who solicit and act upon the most input from their staff. The study found that this leadership style had a strong association with better quality of care. That is, we want to listen to the direct care staff members and the nurses who provide the hands-on care. Another study, we're all acutely aware of extreme workforce crisis in long-term care homes. This study looked at the impact on nursing staff turnover. They found that administrators who were characterized as operating as consensus managers were associated with the lowest turnover levels, substantially lower, I should say, as opposed to what was classified as shareholder managers. So taking a step back here, I want to give a definition of fear. We all kind of use the word fear, but I thought it's important to kind of open it up a little bit. Fear is defined as an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger. And fear of retaliation has been defined as a concern or feeling of vulnerability that one's actions may cause retaliation by another. Retaliation has been described as an actual or perceived negative reaction of a person as a result of another person's action or behavior. I'm aware that could be better definitions, but at least I believe that there's some value in that as well. So what are some of the actions that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services that oversees over 15,000 nursing homes in America considers as retaliation against staff? When the nursing home discharges, demotes, suspends, threatens, harasses, or denies a promotion or other employment-related benefit, or that it discriminates against employee in the terms and conditions of employment because of a lawful act done by the employee. So while looking at the literature, I quickly found that there's a major gap in knowledge with regards to this particular phenomenon of staff fear of retaliation. We do have anecdotal evidence, and you do see some mentions of it in journal articles. However, there's a limited attention in research. And also, to my knowledge, there's a lack of educational initiatives and preventive measures. Here you see a group of individuals are trying to cross a broken bridge in Egypt. So how can we bridge this gap in knowledge? So what are the goals of this project? I aim to identify the circumstances surrounding staff fear of retaliation and the consequences on residents and staff members. My overarching goal was to raise staff voice. So the data, briefly, I gained access to 50 state survey and complaint investigation reports from 50 nursing homes in 26 states. The time period in which these investigations were concluded was between the end of 2017 and August 2022. Today, I will share select examples of my summaries of these investigation reports. In this nursing home, a registered nurse, against policy, turned off the resident's TV. The resident was watching a baseball game after 11 p.m. The resident had moderate cognitive impairment and required extensive assistance with activities of daily living. The resident care plan clearly stated that it is important that the resident engages in daily routines that are meaningful to his or her preferences, including watching sports on TV. RN1 told a nurse aide that all TVs had to be turned off at 11:30 p.m. Then the RN went into the resident's bedroom, turned off the TV, and placed the remote outside of the resident's reach. The nurse aide did not report the incident because she was afraid that the registered nurse would retaliate against her. Another nurse aide confirmed that the RN shut off the TV against the resident's wish. She had not reported her concerns because she was afraid of retaliation. Another RN knew the incident should have been reported, but she did not report it because she was afraid of retaliation. Here we have a situation of fear of retaliation after witnessing verbal abuse. A resident with cognitive impairment and dementia described as experiencing a really bad PTSD. He lived on a locked unit. The resident was very sensitive to sound and always requests that we speak very quietly to him. He asked the recreation worker, that is RW1, to talk more quietly. In response, the recreation worker raised his voice to almost a shouting level. I can talk like this, or I can talk like this. A staff who witnessed it says, I was shocked into tears. It was outrageous that the recreation worker would act with such disregard to a very vulnerable resident. During another incident, the resident asked another recreation worker, take him, that is RW1, out of my room. In response, the recreation worker started clapping very loudly and talking loudly. The resident looked visibly upset. All three recreation workers expressed fear of retaliation from this particular recreation worker. In this case, there was a delay in reporting of a verbal abuse. You have a resident with severe cognitive impairment. CNA 2 witness CNA 1 verbally abused the resident using obscenities because the resident had a bowel movement at shift change. CNA 2 did not report the incident until the next day because the CNA was afraid of CNA 1 and didn't want to report him for fear of retaliation. Here you have a unique situation where the staff were fearful of the board of directors of the nursing home. The board of directors, the investigation concluded, acted with disregard to the well-being of the residents. The board did not take effective action to address staffing shortages. This impacted all residents and contributed to multiple clinical failures at the harm level. Staff members were afraid, there was distrust, and experienced job insecurity as a result of interactions with the board. Staff members who wished to remain anonymous said, "The board doesn't take any suggestions we have into consideration, and it is impacting the safety of the residents. I'm afraid to say anything because the board will retaliate. We are kept in the dark and are afraid of the future. We love our residents, and the level of distress, this is creating is enormous." In this nursing home, staff members were terrified of an administrator's retaliation. The owner and management company in this nursing home failed to pay various vendors for services. These failures place residents at risk of serious harm or death from going without food, water, heating, air conditioning, and essential medical equipment. It also placed them at risk of injury or death due to fire or infection. It placed them at risk of not having their needs met due to lack of staff. For example, the pharmacy bill went unpaid until the pharmacy threatened to discontinue delivery of medications, or not paying oxygen delivery company until the nursing home ran out of oxygen tanks. One resident reported that she or he had a hard time breathing because of it. An anonymous employee said everyone in the nursing was terrified of the administrator's retaliation if they spoke to anyone about the issues in the building. And it was reported that the administrator placed cameras that connected to his or her cell phone to monitor staff. This action made most everyone afraid to speak freely about any problems. In this nursing home, there was lack of reporting of a resident who died. The resident was cognitively intact. A CNA and an LPN1 didn't check on the resident throughout the night. The CNA found the resident, quote, clearly deceased at 7:15 a.m. in the morning and immediately reported it to the LPN1. LPN1 went into the bedroom and verified the resident's condition as unresponsive. Neither of them initiated CPR on the resident despite full code status. The LPN told the CNA not to report it. They finished their shift and left the nursing home without notifying anyone that the resident was expired. I think it's worth pausing for a second. Sometimes language is very symbolic and important here. We're still using terms such as expired to describe the passing of human beings, older adults. Expired. Like it's a product on a shelf in a supermarket. The CNA didn't tell anyone, explaining that she feared retaliation from the nurse because she has gotten people fired in the past. Another nurse said, "I don't know how, not even as a nurse, but as a human being, how anyone could do that, not initiate CPR to another person." The LPN and the CNA gave report that the resident was fine, punched out, and left. "You wouldn't even do that to a dog," the licensed practical nurse said. Here you had an allegation of retaliation against staff. The resident had dementia and used a wheelchair. The LPN tipped the resident's wheelchair backwards and aggressively told him or her to stay in his or her bedroom. 5 months later, the LPN shoved the resident in her or his wheelchair and into his or her bedroom forcefully. The confidential staff reported that the LPN treated the resident like a dog when they pointed down the hallway and told him or her to go to his bedroom. Staff were afraid to report it due to fear of retaliation. CNA1 reported that the LPN's mistreatment, the CNA reported the mistreatment to the administrator. As a result, she said that she became the target of hostile staff. CNA2, that is another CNA who reported concerns of verbal abuse toward the resident by another staff member, said when she advocated for residents, she was disciplined for minor infractions or punished with schedule changes. A CNA, this is a different incident within the same nursing home. A CNA reported that staff 2 frequently kind of picks on resident 2. One day, staff 2 entered the bedroom of resident 2. The resident became really upset, saying staff 2 picked on him or her. Resident 2 asked staff 2 to leave the bedroom, but the staff member did not leave. Staff 3 intervened and asked staff 2 to respect the wishes of the resident and leave the bedroom. In response, staff 2 immediately retaliated against staff 3 and told her they would have a meeting the following day with the administrator due to her insubordination. Staff 2 frequently used threats of discipline against staff who advocate for residents. Resident 2 stated staff 2 repeatedly targeted and punished her or him, adding that staff 2 intended to fire staff 3 because staff 3 stepped in and stood up to protect the resident during the incident. Another staff member stated that staff 3 who tried to intervene was in trouble because she had advocated for resident 2 when staff 2 was abusive. Here in this nursing home, multiple staff members said that the LVN, that is a licensed vocational nurse, forced residents to get out of bed against their will. Some were begging not to be bothered. 2 residents with moderate cognitive impairment voiced concern to the director of nursing about the nurse's bullying. CNA1 stated that this was reported to the administration, but nothing was done, and the staff fears retaliation, so they don't mention it anymore. The Dawn, that is the director of nursing who was aware of it, stated it does not get reported to her often due to staff concern about retaliation. The nurse rides you. It was described by the CNAs. We see this incident continue when the CNA2 described ways in which the LVN retaliates against staff members in the following ways: making your work more difficult. The nurse rides you, pressuring the staff to get things done in a hurry when they have the entire shift to do their tasks, and making sarcastic and rude comments to staff. Here you have a case of ongoing CNA neglect of residents. Multiple CNAs and nurses shared concerns regarding CNA1's neglect of residents' care. Resident 1 had watery stool all the way up to her shoulders, covering her head and back. Another CNA said that resident 5, another resident, was crying from being left in urine, adding, when you walk in and see her crying because she was not taken to the bathroom, it breaks your heart and makes you angry. CNA2 stated the neglect went on for about 3 to 4 months, adding she's mandated reported, and she should have reported the neglect, but did not, out of fear of retaliation from coworkers. A licensed practical nurse did not provide tracheal suctioning to a resident who is described as alert and oriented with a history of respiratory failure. The resident struggled with anxiety related to the tracheal suctioning, and he fears he will choke in his septum and die. The resident's responsible party said that it has been very difficult, especially during nights and weekends. He calls me because he feels like he is suffocating. LPN1 stated that there are times when LPN2 doesn't suction him. One night, she was nowhere to be found. When asked if she had reported these concerns, LPN1 said that there was some nepotism going on and she did not want retaliation. In this incident, an abuse that went on for about 2 months and was witnessed was not reported. Resident with severe cognitive impairment described as bedbound. CNA1 stated that 2 months ago, while attempting to turn and reposition the resident, another CNA2, became frustrated when the resident could not participate in the turning. CNA2 yelled at the resident to turn and then slapped her legs hard. It made an audible sound and left a temporary red mark when the resident did not move. She said that what she witnessed was verbal and physical abuse. CNA1, however, did not report the incident at the time because she was afraid of retaliation. So it took her 2 months to come forward And she explained that she came forward now because she did not want what had happened to the resident to happen to other residents. She said that remaining silent about what she witnessed bothered her. In this case, there was abusive physical restraint and there was a delay of reporting of it. A resident with severe cognitive impairment and with a history of stroke. The resident had a habit of kicking the left leg off the side of the bed, but the resident did not try to get out of the bed. A CNA tied the resident's hospital gown at the back of his knees or her knees. Staff members were aware, but did not report it. The next day, the CNA did it again. This time it ended up with an injury, skin tear, and a bruising to both shins of the resident. 4 staff members observed it, including the RN. The RN waited until the next day to report it because she wanted to remain anonymous. She wanted to keep it confidential, so there would not be any retaliation against her. In this case, leadership, assistant director of nursing, pressures nursing staff to falsify insulin records. During an interview with an employee who wished to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation by the nursing home, said that she or he was told by the assistant director of nursing that if the staff were to give insulin late, they have to go into the electronic records, falsify documentation, and change the time the insulin was given to avoid non-compliance with federal nursing home regulations. She stated that she won't falsify documentation, she won't do it, and she won't risk her nursing license. She added that, however, that the nursing staff just follow along with the instruction. In this case, there was severe staffing levels, but staff were fearful of retaliation when reporting it. The resident had severe cognitive impairment and described as nonverbal. The nursing home, the investigation concluded, failed to ensure that the resident was checked on as needed throughout the night shift. The resident was found with 10 to 15 ants crawling on her while in bed with ant bites throughout her body, causing pain, red welts, and hives. The resident was grimacing with her jaw clenched and her legs were shaking as if she was in pain. Several CNAs stated that the ongoing staff shortages prevented them from caring to residents. A registered nurse said that the lack of care residents are receiving due to being short-staffed is heartbreaking. 5 staff members wanted to remain anonymous due to fear of retaliation by management and the staffing coordinator. Another nursing home, also with dangerous staffing levels and staff afraid to say anything about it. The investigation concluded that the nursing home failed to ensure adequate staffing of nurses and CNAs to provide the ordered care. Nurse 1 stated there's not enough staffing to care for residents and gave the following example that happened 2 nights prior. 2 CNAs were assigned to 26 residents each. And adding that the residents are total care and incontinent. They need to be turned and repositioned. They are lying in their feces and urine. A staff member 2, stated, the ones who suffer are the residents. They get pressure ulcers, they end up infected. Families complain, management tells staff not to tell them the caseload or that they are short-staffed, but that is what is causing most of the issues. And management never address the underlying issue of staffing ratios. The staff added, many other staff members feel the same way, but are afraid to say anything for fear of retaliation. Here you have staff members asking to remain anonymous when reporting to a surveyor on poor staffing levels in their nursing home. It is a dementia unit, and most residents there who live there and received care had advanced dementia. The investigation concluded that the nursing home failed to ensure there were enough nursing assistants working at each shift to provide the care for the residents. 5 nurse aides wanted to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation by administration and from some nurses. They stated retaliation would come in the forms of being given the cold shoulder, being yelled at in front of their peers, and being labeled as troublemakers to the point you either got fired or quit. Their biggest concern was not enough staff. There were 28 to 30 residents on the unit on a good day, and on a good day, there were 2 nurse aides assigned. The staff members added that they often worked repeated double shifts to the point of exhaustion. They felt awful, and they were frequently brought to tears in frustration. Here you have fear of retaliation from an administrator and an abusive director of nursing. The resident was cognitively intact and had post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The dawn was witnessed by multiple staff to verbally and physically abuse the resident in the morning and the afternoon. The dawn screamed at the resident to get back into his room because he was on isolation. The dawn pushed the resident onto the bed, yelled at him, and then administered him a medication injection. The resident was crying, begging the dawn to stop yelling. "Why are you doing this to me?" he asked. The director of nursing responded, "Cut your crap out. You are spreading germs throughout the facility. I don't have time for this." In the same nursing home, after the incident, the resident told the CNA that he wanted to die, and he didn't want to be in a nursing home if he's treated like that. At the hospital, the resident told a registered nurse he didn't want to go back to the nursing home because the dawn had hit him. Another CNA stated all the staff are scared, terrified, and intimidated by the administrator. The CNA added she knows she would lose her job if she speaks with state surveyors. Plain and simple. The director of nursing employment eventually was terminated, and staff felt more comfortable with the new director of nursing. In this appalling and traumatic incident, a resident with severe cognitive impairment was described as hitting, scratching, and biting staff during showers. CNAs witnessed the following incident during a shower. A CNA held the shower head directly in front of the resident's face and told her to shut up. The CNA intentionally and repeatedly sprayed the resident in her face as a result of her behavior in the shower. It appeared to me as waterboarding, the witness CNA said. The CNA sprayed it so long, it was hard for the resident to breathe. According to the nursing home's abuse policy, the nursing home failed to ensure that reporters are free from retaliation or reprisal. Here you have ongoing abuse by an administrator. A resident one, said that basically the entire leadership talked down to her like she's zero. She feels humiliated when they speak to her like she is a child. She said that the administrative staff charge into her bedroom like an army and rake you over the coals. It scares and frightens her. She's afraid to say anything about how she was treated. Another resident described the administrator as bullish, abusive, threatening, and humiliating. Resident 3 described him as a dictator. Staff feared for their jobs and felt powerless to protect residents. 2 CNAs felt intimidated by the leadership and feared retaliation in the form of being fired if they reported how these leadership staff abuse and mistreat one resident. One of these CNAs stated she could not be without work as she had a family to support. She felt powerless. In this disturbing incident, an aide reported witnessing a weekend LPN committing physical and verbal abusive act towards 3 residents over the past 2 months. The aide, who asked to remain anonymous, wrote in a statement, "The nurse's abusive acts occurred on the night shift when no other staff was around except her. The LPN grabbed cheese and threw it at the resident's face. She cursed at the resident. She filled a long syringe with water and squirted water on 2 other residents while they were sleeping. The LPN perpetrator called it a mini baptismal and shared that she did similar things to residents at another care home when she didn't like the residents. The aide lived across the street from the LPN and felt in danger of retaliation because she, the aide, was the only staff member working with the LPN when the abusive acts occurred. She reported the abuse only a day or so after the nursing home terminated the LPN's employment." Here you have a resident with severe cognitive impairment. The CNA called for help from inside resident 2 bedroom. An RN entered and saw resident 2 standing by resident's 4 bed. Resident 2 asked the CNA to get resident 4 out of his bedroom, but resident 4 lived in that bedroom. The CNA heard something drop and then saw a jar of water thrown on resident's 4 bed. The LVN grabbed resident's two forearms and pushed him down to his bed. The resident started kicking. The nurse put her knee on the resident's abdomen until he stopped kicking. When the nurse let go, the RN saw the skin on the resident's on the resident was torn and bleeding. The RN was described as shocked and was scared and shaking. She did not report the incident because she was scared of being retaliated by the nurse, by the LVN. The next morning, the RN spoke with a friend who told her she had to report it, so she did. Here you have inappropriate kissing by a staff member of residents. 3 residents had severe cognitive impairment. They lacked the cognitive ability to consent to being kissed. The investigation concluded that the nursing home failed to protect the residents from a staffer who kissed residents on the face, mouth, and forehead. The nursing home failed to ensure an environment in which staff feel safe to report allegations and violations of abuse without fear of reprisal for 3 residents. One staff member observed the kissing of the 3 residents. She wanted to report it immediately, but was afraid of retaliation from the perpetrator and 2 other staff members. She eventually reported it, but the kissing continued. She even reported it to the ombudsman, but was disappointed by the response she received. After that, she did not feel anyone would listen to her concerns. Another staff witnessed the kissing on several occasions almost every day. She reported it immediately, but was fearful of retaliation from the perpetrator and 2 other staff members. We are moving into some incidents of sexual abuse. A resident who was described as alert and oriented, a CNA heard that a male nurse, LPN, was giving the resident other residents medications, and the resident was giving him oral sex in return. Another CNA stated that the resident told him that the LPN had groped her, inserted his finger in her vagina, and tried to get her to perform oral sex on him. 2 CNAs did not report the LPN's suspicious behavior due to fear of retaliation from the LPN, who was their supervisor. Here we have delay in reporting on witnessed sexual abuse. The resident was described as cognitively intact and stated, when a male nurse, LVN, came to her bedroom to measure her blood pressure, that is the resident's arm, accidentally brushed against the nurse's crotch. The resident apologized and lifted her arm back up. The LVN then reached his hand into his pants and pulled out his penis. The resident told the LVN to leave, which he did. A CNA who witnessed it did not report it to the administrator for 7 days, stating she was afraid to immediately report the incident because she feared retaliation if the nurse lost his job. Here you have a nurse not charting witnessed resident to resident masturbating. The resident 8 was cognitively intact. Resident 12 was severely cognitively impaired. A nurse, that is LVN, and a physician entering resident's 8th bedroom. They are witnessing resident 8 guiding resident 12. Remember, resident 8 is the cognitively intact, and resident 12 has severe cognitive impairment, masturbating resident's 8th penis. When LVN notified the former director of nursing, the Dawn seemed giddy, as if it was funny for her, and she instructed the nurse not to chart it. The LVN did not notify any family members at the direction of the former director of nursing, and the LVN also did not notify the administrator. The witnessing physician's reaction, believe it or not, was, and that is how you keep state out of your building. In the same nursing home, a licensed vocational nurse said she disagreed with the former director of nursing, but due to previous circumstances, she followed her direction and did not chart it for fear of retaliation, adding that the former director of nursing had crossed her before and had multiple shifts taken away from her. She needed those work shifts and therefore followed her direction, even though she knew it was not right. Here you have moving into theft of opioid pain medications. There was delay of an allegation of those thefts that was allegedly committed by a registered nurse. The RN will come into work hungover, potentially under the influence, and unsafe with residents. Staff members had concerns regarding the registered nurse. He sleeps a lot, they said. He smells like alcohol, and he's acting erratically off the wall. An LPN said the staff reported their concerns, but management had not addressed them and often retaliated against those who would report. The LPN observed the RN doing something suspicious with medications, but the LPN was hesitant to say anything as management does not do anything and tends to retaliate against reporters. Here you have another incident of theft of opioid pain medication. An LPN was confirmed to steal controlled medication narcotics prescribed to a resident. The nurse also stole narcotics from other residents and was working under the influence. Despite multiple allegations by several staff members for months regarding possible misappropriation by the nurse, there was no investigation, no reporting, no prevention or protection of the resident. Staff members were aware. A staff member was aware that the LPN emptied an entire bottle of medication belonging to the resident and replaced it with water and said, "I'm a whistleblower and I'm being retaliated against. I have had problems with the LPN because she's stealing narcotics." And in some cases, allegations of abuse were retracted. Here you have a resident with moderate impaired cognition and did not want to be changed for his or her soiled adult depends, but was changed anyway. The resident became, quote, combative and called CNA racial names. The CNA then took a pillow, pressed the pillow over the resident's head for about 10 seconds while making racial slurs to the resident. CNA trainee, one who witnessed it, was pretty shaken up at what she saw and reported it to the administration. While in the locker room, the CNA perpetrator told the 3 CNA trainees witnesses that they need to say that while rolling the resident, his or her head got pushed up against the pillow. After being questioned about the incident by the director of nursing, the CNA trainee, one, felt intimidated. In fear of retaliation from the CNA perpetrator, the CNA trainee retracted her statement and quit her job 15 minutes after her shift ended. What a way to learn the ropes of becoming a CNA. Okay, so I would like to provide a summary of some of the consequences of this phenomena on residents. Overall, we can clearly see that employees' fear of retaliation often resulted in lack of reporting or delays in reporting, and a lack of or delay of investigation of right violations, poor care, and mistreatment of residents. The circumstances surrounding had to do with dangerous staffing levels, neglect of care, verbal abuse, physical abuse, abusive physical restraint, sexual abuse, theft of opioid pain medication. I should add allegation of financial exploitation allegedly by an administrator, and records falsification, as we saw earlier. The outcome? Ongoing neglect of care, abuse, and theft were allowed to continue. And this is, I believe, a contribution to the literature about what makes it so that what we know about mistreatment of older adults in long-term care homes is only the tip of the iceberg, as Elder Voice Advocates' image here on the right illustrates. Moving on to another goal of this project, which is what were the consequences on employees? Well, many experienced, as we saw, emotional distress, and they fear, some were, in their words, were terrified of retaliation by supervisors, managers, and coworkers. Many asked to remain anonymous. There were allegations of threats to discipline staff advocating for residents. There were allegations of actual retaliation, including becoming a target of hostile staff, making your work more difficult, being labeled as a troublemaker to the point you either got fired or quit, being disciplined for minor infractions, being punished with schedule changes, feeling awful and frequently brought to tears and frustration, feeling powerless to protect residents. And I want to just pause here for a moment. Maybe the goal of this project is to empower direct care staff member, and for leadership, that is owners and administrators, to empower residents to speak up, because it is obviously could be beneficial for the nursing home's ability to realize its mission to provide dignified, adequate care, safe care, and to reduce different forms of mistreatment. So how can we empower direct care staff members to speak up? And staff fear that they will be fired from their jobs. You have to remember that many are many of the direct care staff members live in poverty or near the poverty line, and they live from paycheck to paycheck, and they don't have the ability to afford to lose a single paycheck. Many of them single mothers, immigrants, and people from minority groups, such as African Americans and Hispanics. One CNA stated that she could not be without work as she had family to support. She felt hopeless. And we can start seeing preliminary threads of learned helplessness among staff members who, after reporting or fearing reporting on an ongoing basis, they literally discontinue to voice care concerns. Many experienced excruciating emotional dilemma as to whether or not to report mistreatment. Moving on to some of the practical implications of this project. The bottom line is that we need to break the silence about this phenomena, and literally the silence. We need to raise awareness to this phenomena. We need to make sure that all care employees, direct and indirect care employees, must be free from fear of retaliation when providing care and voicing concerns about right violations, poor care, and mistreatment of residents. And I would say that the quality of care can only be as good as the extent and quality of listening to direct care staff members' voice. Other practical implications: we must ensure that all employees know their rights. We must ensure that all care homes know their responsibilities in this specific context. The nursing homes and assisted living residences must have strong whistleblower protections, and regulatory agencies must have strong whistleblower protections for these individuals. And it must reflect in the policies and procedures. We must educate providers and staff about potential consequences that could be, as we saw, far-reaching and serious for employees and residents. We must educate and ensure that owners, administrators, and directors of nursing have direct involvement in addressing this phenomena. And I'm mentioning owners because, as we've seen, in some cases, the allegations or actual retaliation was conducted by leadership, by administrators and directors of nursing. There's got to be zero tolerance policy in nursing homes. We must ensure accountability of mandatory reporters. And I believe, as previously a social worker in a nursing home myself, that social workers and psychologists can play a key role in leading efforts to address this phenomena. And I would add that the Human Resources Department should play a stronger role in giving voice to direct care staff members, and perhaps not being inclined to side with leadership all too quickly. We must instill open communication practices and a teamwork that is key to the prevention of this phenomena. We must instill an environment where there's trust and support of direct care staff members, as opposed to a hostile, toxic, and bullying environment. I believe that this is an example of what we should aspire to in terms of culture of learning, which I believe is the basis for a culture of resident and staff safety. There's got to be a mechanism for identifying and addressing staff concerns, and it must be done proactively and in a routine basis, in a meaningful way. The long-term care ombudsman must be involved not only in resident fear retaliation, but also in staff fear retaliation. And the reason is simple, because it has direct effect on residents' care and safety. I believe that in some cases, the union could be involved as representatives of the voice of direct care staff members. And we must increase the role of CMS and state survey agencies in tracking this phenomena centrally, and increasing the oversight and enforcement of this phenomena. How often state survey agencies across the country entering nursing homes and assisted living residences and asking staff members if they feel safe to speak up about care concerns and mistreatment of residents and whether they're afraid of retaliation. So nursing home and other long-term care homes, assisted livings, I believe, should routinely and proactively ask direct care staff members, do you feel safe reporting care concerns? Are you afraid of retaliation when reporting resident mistreatment? And then acting upon what they're hearing in a dignified, meaningful way. So shortly before this presentation, I went into CMS archive of what is called the 5-star quality rating, the overall quality rating of the 50 nursing homes in this project. And I'm well aware and wrote a whole report recently of how flawed that nursing home care compare 5-star quality rating is. But with that, still, I believe there is value in looking into that too. So what I found is that in 49 of those 50 nursing homes, the average quality star rating of these 50 nursing homes on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 is the worst and 5 is the best, the average was 2.81, which is below state average. So it tells us something already that I believe future research needs to examine in a more meaningful, more larger scale, more rigorous way. Is there a connection between the overall quality of care in the nursing home and this phenomena? Because it's very important to identify risk and protective factors to address it. And another thing that came out from this examination of the star rating is that no nursing home is immune to this phenomena. We had a bunch of nursing homes that had 5-star ratings, 4-star ratings, and they had some horrific incidents and allegations of fear of retaliation, that staff expressed fear of retaliation, an allegation, and actual retaliation. So no nursing home is immune to this phenomena. I just want to start closing here by making sure that we all know that there are serious protections in federal nursing home retaliation related to retaliation against employees. It must be reflected in actionable policies and procedures of the nursing home. And there got to be prohibition of this retaliation against employees, as you can see here on the slide. There's also specific state survey deficiency citations, also called FTAG, F608, in the context of requirements for reporting reasonable suspicion of a crime, including strong protections protections for whistleblowers who are suspecting crime against residents. And also F609, reporting of all alleged violations, including different forms of mistreatment, must be reported immediately to the administrator and the state survey agency with specific timelines for each severity level of allegation. And I want to close with a call for research. We urgently need to study staff fear of retaliation, residents' fear of retaliation, families' fear of retaliation in nursing home and assisted living residences, because I'm starting to examine fear of retaliation in assisted living residences as well, and I know it occurs there. Otherwise, if we won't have this research, and if we won't take action as nursing home owners and as policymakers, these phenomena will remain largely invisible and unaddressed. So in closing, we need to break the silence and give real voice, meaningful voice to the foundation of care, to the bedrock of the long-term care sector, the direct care staff members. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. We're moving to the next phase of this presentation.
Eilon, thank you so much. As always, this was excellent, compelling, disturbing, but it is a call to action. And I hope you do get the resources you need to continue your research. I can tell you as a family member, retaliation was a constant consideration. I recall telling my dad I was going to go to management and talk to them about an issue. And he said, please don't, it'll get worse. And so the retaliation, not only to the family member, but then turning back again to the resident. I also wanted to bring up a couple of recent situations that have come to my attention. One was a young lady, stellar performance reviews, until she reported issues that she was observing in the care, in the inadequate care being given. Just 2 weeks after that, she was fired. So when she talked to me, she said, I need to get another job. They'll make sure I don't get that job if I'm speak out publicly. So we lost a very good person, but hopefully she made it to another place. Another person contacted me just a couple months ago, and it was a staff person who was very abusive, very, very abusive. And yet the management wouldn't deal with this person because of shortages. So this very high quality, great staff person quit, couldn't deal with it, and left the whole long-term care industry. So the points I'm bringing out is the good people are fleeing these positions, and they're exactly the people we need to, keep in our system, because they are the lifeblood of what provides quality care. I guess my question to you, Eilon, is, as you pointed out, we've got good laws that establish good protections. Do we have an enforcement problem? Is that what's happening?
Oh, absolutely. Even in nursing home, where we have comprehensive federal nursing home regulations, the enforcement is often weak. Only recently, there was a big report, inspection neglected or neglected inspections, very big report about this issue in nursing homes. But you and I, Chris, know very well that if enforcement is weak in nursing homes, it is often in many states very weak in assisted living residences. And also the laws are relatively much weaker in many states. So absolutely, that's a very important point, because as the former Commissioner of Health of Minnesota said, that the laws are only as good as their enforcement.
And I would add to that, don't blame the Department of Health. You need to take a look at your legislature. Are each and every one of those legislators passing the funding required for these agencies to do that enforcement? And so I would encourage people to look more broadly at the cause, because it's easy to point our fingers to the state agencies, when in fact we should be talking to the policymakers. Who another just, and I know, Eilon, you're so aware of this too. All of these phenomenon are happening in assisted living, in home care, in boarding care, all of these areas. So I'm hoping that you get what you need to continue this kind of in-depth research. And as you said, we've got to raise our voices, and we've got to grow awareness. And Elder Voice Advocates is always behind you. And I thank you for your work, and thank you for being here today.
Chris, thank you so much. We know that there's not a lot of organizations across the country that do what you and Elder Voice Advocates are doing. We are all the residents and their families are extremely grateful for what you do every day. You give real meaning to what when we say giving voice. And I think today was another example of that, I hope. So I want to just kind of close by saying that my hope is that today's presentation illustrates that director staff voice matters, and matters a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for our viewers for participating. And please use this and pass on the links to anybody that you think might be of use. Thank you very much.